What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, it was certainly an interesting weekend, especially starting on Friday when PlayStation Network went down, and then it was down for a while, spreading into the weekend, and there were a lot of questions around this. Well, we did get a response, and it wasn't exactly what people were looking for from Sony. We'll go over that, though, here today. Also, we are going to be talking about WB and some of the projects they have in the works and how it is not going well, especially in the short term, but maybe a glimmer of hope for single-player fans. And then we'll also be talking about Nintendo seemingly getting a big franchise back, setting up the Switch 2 as maybe more and more of just the mainstream device. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below. And we're going to start today with Insomniac and some unfortunate news, specifically around a pitch that, of course, we didn't know about because it wasn't greenlit. This was shared. We can see this posted up. This is over on Insider Gaming as they transcribed this from a sit-down with Kinda Funny Games. And Ted Price, of course, is going to be retiring from Insomniac Games after more than 3 decades now, saying that Resistance 4 was a game that they actually pitched to Sony, and it wasn't greenlit, sadly. Now, it's hard to say exactly when this pitch was made, and I think timing is kind of key here when it comes to the idea of a 4th Resistance game, because it was right after Resistance 3. It didn't exactly go crazy in terms of sales. In fact, the overall franchise was technically trending downward, and at that time, this was like 2011, 2012, right in there, there were a lot of shooters on the market. Now it's kind of dried up a bit if it's not a live service experience, so maybe it could work now better than before, but look at what Insomniac's doing right now. They might not have any time in order to create a new Resistance game anyway. So in essence, sure, if it was after that, and instead they said, hey, how would you like to work on a Spider-Man game for us? And then eventually it led to them getting outright bought by Sony. Well, I guess technically that worked out in the long run for Insomniac, but what could have been with a Resistance 4 maybe to get things rolling with the PlayStation 4? Also, we did get some news from Square Enix, something we never hear from them when it comes to sales expectations. I mean, when was the last time you heard Square Enix say, yeah, that actually met our expectations? It's not typical. But what about when they say this thing exceeded their expectations? That never happens until Dragon Quest III HD 2D, which we can see over Twisted Voxel. Sales of Square Enix's role-playing game, Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake, have exceeded expectations according to the publisher. That's incredible. Now, this was it was a down report recently with their financial quarter, and a lot of that was, as they mentioned, just slowing of sales for HD releases, which not as many, right? When you think about, okay, they didn't have a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to release, or a Final Fantasy 16, or a Dragon Quest 12, that's still in the oven now. So the fact that their highlight was Dragon Quest III HD 2D, I think it's a very positive thing just for more HD 2D remakes in the future, especially around classic titles from Dragon Quest, which we have the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 at some point getting that same remake treatment. So that's the next one, I guess, to look forward to there. But also maybe them playing around with some other lesser known franchises and intellectual properties from the past, that 16-bit era or PS1 era even with Square Enix, and what they can come up with and move into that HD 2D engine. Oh, and we do have Avowed out this week, and we actually got some good news when it comes to the performance, because prior to this, we heard that Avowed, they were aiming for 30 FPS because they could do more visually speaking, especially all the spells and the effects from that. Well, we can see this is transcribed. This is from the MinMax podcast. The game director, Carrie Patel, mentioned you can get up to 60 FPS on the Xbox Series X. Now, I assume there's going to be different graphical modes as GameSpot theorizes here, so we'll see exactly what, I guess, graphical settings we have in the options mode. But still, this is good to see that we do have a performance mode, because many times, especially with Microsoft and Xbox, the performance mode might come later, like something with Redfall as an example. I like to have the 60 FPS modes ready to go on release because that's the preferred way I'd like to play. I'll turn down the visuals, I'll turn down the resolution if I get an overall smoother experience, especially in something like Avowed, where it is first person primarily. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony and PlayStation Network, which was down for nearly 24 hours starting Friday late afternoon, depending, of course, on time zone and stuff, say in the US. If it was on the West Coast, as you were getting off work, say around 4 or 5, you weren't really able to play online for a lot of certainly the multiplayer games on PlayStation, but then also, in some cases, digital purchases and licensing that was attached to the authentication server, and it wasn't great. Clearly, people were not happy, as you would expect them not to be, for a service that is, of course, paid. But as the hours went by, there were a lot of concerns around what was happening. But like you can see, for example, this over on their official Ask PlayStation account, they say, we are aware some users might be currently experiencing issues with PSN. I did a video over the weekend sort of covering this in real time as it was still down, and as of course there were a lot of reactions to this. For example, MVG, he mentioned it and then he posted, I saw over on his account on Twitter X, saying play has no limits, mind you, and that was him unable to launch Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 because his PlayStation 5 Pro was not set up as the primary PS5 device sort of in his collection on his account. So because of that, he wasn't able to play it. And unfortunately, when the network is down, you can't go in and then set it as your primary device, which means you're kind of locked out even from, well, your digital purchases at that time. That doesn't mean that if you wouldn't be able to play them if say you did have it set as a primary device. Like my PS5 Pro, I did set it that way and I was able to play like all my digital games, no problem. Trophy data was an issue. Syncing save data, also an issue, of course, alongside of just multiplayer games not working at all. So kind of an issue there for a service that starts at $80 a year. And that's the biggest thing here. Keep in mind, we have technically raised expectations as we've raised the price for this. Well, Sony's raised the price, going as far as $60 to $80. Yeah, there are expectations that, you know, it's going to work when the weekend starts, especially since there was also a Monster Hunter Wilds open beta going on, which that was also addressed. It appears they're going to be extending that beta, that being Capcom for Monster Hunter, 24 hours to sort of fill in. But that also means that the 24 hours would technically run into like Monday. That's the other big thing here is people are going to be more annoyed because it happened when they would have technically had more maybe leisure time, say at the end of the week, Friday going into Saturday, as opposed into like a Monday to Tuesday. Anyway, we can see late Saturday night, like right at the tick over midnight on the East Coast into Sunday, Ask PlayStation finally responded, saying network services have fully recovered from an operational issue. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank the community for their patience. All PlayStation Plus members will automatically receive an additional 5 days of service. Yeah, not really what people were hoping to see. Okay, so if you look at it that way, okay, so you lost a day, they gave you 5. So technically you got 4 extra days for missing out on a Friday into Saturday for playing PlayStation Online, right? Okay, so in that case, you gain like 400%, right, of the missing time. But I think most people go, okay, well, 5 days, how much is that actually worth technically? Well, it's not a lot really. People, of course, online breaking down the $80 divided by 365 times. But to me, that's not a great gesture. But I think some were also going a little far at saying they should have given us all a free game of our choice. If you remember back in 2011, when this happened for almost a month. So think about it this way. It was down for more than 3 weeks. Just wasn't working. Here's what they showed up with then. It was a list of a heavily curated lineup of games. We had Dead Nation, Infamous, Little Big Planet, Super Stardust HD, Wipeout HD plus Fury, and then on the PSP side, because they were also affected, Little Big Planet PSP, Mod Nation Racers, Pursuit Force, Killzone Liberation. Not exactly opening up the entire library of games and saying pick one. Now, they did let you pick 2 titles, so I'm sure many people went with like Infamous and Little Big Planet, or Infamous and Stardust HD, something like that. So I think a lot of people just ended up with Infamous, to be honest. So it's not like the precedent was there for them to just give you a bunch of stuff. And considering it was less than 24 hours in their mind, hey, 5 days. But also, it's not like Sony's heavily pressed on this matter, because even with all of this, people were just kind of sitting around waiting for PlayStation to come back. They didn't exactly, from what I was seeing online, go, oh, well, I'm going to go to Xbox or go to PC. They're just like, okay, I guess we're going to wait for PlayStation to come back. And that's kind of that's the grip that PlayStation has on the market. I guess the big thing here, though, is it shined a light on the idea of a digital-only future and how you can have some hiccups from time to time like this, where if it's fully dependent on a server telling you if you can or can't play your games, yeah, it becomes a problem, and you start missing that wall of physical discs much more. Next up, let's talk about WB Games and how there just seems to be a lot of issues right now there, and unfortunately it includes a title that I thought we were going to see this year because it's been like 3 years now since they first revealed it, that being Wonder Woman. But first, let's take a look here. This was in a report from Jason Schreier at Bloomberg. In fact, he did share a gifted link, and I'll put that down below in the sources, so you can go check this out without like a paywall or anything. So really cool. Puts that up usually on his Blue Sky account. You can check him out there. But we can see this quote here. This is talking about Monolith Productions. Of course, they were the ones working on Wonder Woman. They say they've struggled to coalesce. According to people familiar with the project, early last year, it was rebooted and switched directors. The game has already cost more than $100 million, said the people who asked not to be identified, discussing public information, and is still years away from release. Get this, if it ever makes it to market. Now, the big issue to me here is this is the next, I guess, iteration of the Nemesis system. Remember, that was patented by WB and Monolith and everything. So no one else can really use that kind of iteration of the system that they have set up for Nemesis. So you got to kind of hope this game comes out if you want to see them maybe build on that. Big issue there, by the way, as we talked about with patenting gameplay mechanics and systems. So I guess Wonder Woman, we'll see if it does end up coming out in a few years. Otherwise, what a colossal waste of time for Monolith. Moving on to their Montreal studio. After months of waffling, Bell suggested they should work instead on a game starring a more recognizable character like the Joker or the Flash. Okay. They chose to go with the superhero speedster, which, look, people were asking, how would you make a game around that? Well, I mean, because you're asking that question, I can only assume that if they figured it out, it would have been a pretty unique title then, right? Because we don't even know how that would work necessarily. Okay, but in 2023, Warner Bros. Released Flash, a lavish movie starring Ezra Miller, which bombed at the box office. The video game has since been scrapped. Wow. That Flash movie was worse than we thought because it did so much damage that the video game got halted in its tracks and canceled. Okay, well, what are they doing now? Well, they're helping out with other projects like Wonder Woman, which is still, again, years away, while working on a pitch for a new game based on Game of Thrones. That feels like it's a few years late, but who knows? I mean, Game of Thrones is still, I'm sure, popular. It's something new, I guess. We'll see how that maybe turns out. Okay, Rocksteady. They're looking to return to Batman for a single-player game, but according to people familiar with the timeline, the new project is years away from landing. Avalanche, they're the ones, of course, who made Hogwarts Legacy. They're working on new content, seemingly for Hogwarts Legacy, a refreshed version of that game, and then a sequel that shouldn't shock anyone because incredibly successful titles usually at least get another shot at it with a follow-up here. Only issue, once again, years off. Seems to be a common theme there over at WB, and that's the biggest problem is they don't really have anything for the short term outside of basically doing a re-release, remaster, bundled together version of Hogwarts Legacy. So it's going to be a while, unfortunately, for WB, and that seems to have them mostly relying on mobile titles and just evergreen sales of some of their previous releases. But here's hoping Rocksteady can get back on track with a single-player Batman game. That's at least a step in the right direction. And I would like to see Wonder Woman at least figure things out here with Monolith, and we can see what that Nemesis system, that New Age one, would look like on current hardware. But at this point, maybe they're starting to work on PlayStation 6 games. I guess we'll see. Next up, let's talk about EA seemingly bringing one of their core franchises back to Nintendo. It's one that's been missing since the beginning of the Wii U days. It completely skipped out on all of the Switch so far, but it appears they have their sights set on the Switch too. This was from Andrew Wilson talking with investors because, of course, he was asked about the Switch too. Why wouldn't you be if you were an investor? you'd be very interested in what you're going to do to take advantage of Nintendo's next generation system, especially after the current Switch has passed over 150 million units. We can see this though transcribed over on Polygon. This is from Andrew Wilson. It says, anytime a new console comes into the marketplace, that's of a benefit to us. It gives us the ability to access and acquire new players. Typically, we've had franchises perform very well on Nintendo. Certainly, our expectation is that products like FC and Madden and others might find real energy on the platform as they have done in the past. When you think about something like The Sims and My Sims Cozy Bundle, which performed well ahead of our expectations, 50% of all players were new to EA, that represents a great opportunity for us. So, I mean, if you look, okay, FC is already on the Switch, right? It was FIFA before, then they moved it to FC. Madden, though, does not exist on the Switch. So, the way he's talking about Switch 2 kind of feels like, okay, we're not going to get it onto the current Switch, but we'll be there launch year even for the Switch 2, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. I feel like the next Madden that would technically come out like towards the end of this year, or like that August sort of released, I kind of think it'll be there for the Switch 2. And while I'm sure many of you watching this don't really care that much about Madden being there, what you have to really understand is that's sort of signaling the idea that a lot of these third-party companies that kind of like said, you know, we'll see how things turn out with the Switch, and it's like, maybe. They didn't seem as excited to jump on the bandwagon immediately. I think they're jumping right away onto the Switch too. And if you're seeing Madden, think about all the other bigger quote-unquote mainstream titles that could continue to bring a large audience and, yes, a lot of interest to the Switch 2 from other third parties. It's kind of like this cascading effect, and you get to a position where the Switch 2 basically just has all those default games that typically you'd say, I have a Switch for the first-party Nintendo stuff, and occasionally that third-party game that'd be more convenient to play there, but I have to get a PC, a PlayStation, or an Xbox for your Maddens or anything else that unfortunately just never makes its way there. Call of Duty, another example, that's going to the Switch too, and I believe that would be the next iteration of it in November. So really interesting stuff to keep an eye on here to see how all this works out, especially with that April 2nd show that still feels like it's very far away, but it's right around the corner, just still a couple of months. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Xbox and an apparent report going around about how many systems Microsoft seemed to sell last year, which technically this would be like November to November just based on the data that was shared, but it is from Take-Two. And after the standard math and stuff was done trying to take estimations of PlayStation 5 consoles away from the one big number of next generation pieces of hardware that was sold shared by Take-Two, we can see this. This is shared by Tech for Gamers, saying out of these 94 million, which is the number that Take-Two presented with investors, 94 million consoles between Xbox and PlayStation 5, Xbox is said to have only sold about 29 million consoles. Analysis from last year's report revealed that Xbox had sold about 27 million consoles, indicating a measly 2 million increase. I will tell you this, if Microsoft really sold 2 million consoles in like a 12-month span from November 2023 to November 2024, one holiday included in there, sure, that would be pretty bad. Now, Microsoft has continuously said we're down 20%, we're down 30%, we're down 15% year over year over year over year when it comes to their sales by quarter for Xbox. I can't necessarily put it out of the realm of possibility this is correct. Now, the thing that's kind of throwing me off a bit, and I'm sure others, it's an estimation from Take-Two, and they source a lot of their data from other analysts and locations that really track like active users and stuff. So I don't know if this is the exact number, but I kind of think, I myself think it's right around 30 million Xbox Series systems. And if that were the case, instead of 2 million, it would be 3 million sold in that time period. So even that's not great. We're going to see what PlayStation has to say, I believe, this week with investors on how many PlayStation 5 consoles they've sold. But yeah, Microsoft's trailing bad when it comes to hardware, and their actions kind of line up with it, doesn't it? Like, they're looking to put a lot of their games on PlayStation, and again, I believe pretty soon we're going to see them flood the market, the Switch 2 market, I'll say, with all kinds of first-party releases, similar to what they're starting to do right now with PlayStation, where it's almost like every week you look over, and here's a new announcement for an older Xbox first-party game making the jump to PlayStation. That does line up with the idea that maybe they really did sell 2 million pieces of hardware last year. Could something like Grand Theft Auto 6 turn that around slightly? Yes, I think it could, but I don't think it's going to all of a sudden 5x that number and, oh, we sold 10 million. So it's a rough spot right now for Xbox to be in. And that's one of the reasons I'm really curious what their plan is for next generation, because the current traditional box isn't working for them, similar to how it wasn't working for Nintendo with the Wii U. And we saw the kind of pivot they made. It was drastic. So I'm curious what Microsoft's drastic pivot would be, as they've mentioned it's the most technological, or the biggest technological leap we've seen so far. What exactly do they mean by that? Well, hopefully it's a big enough leap to pivot away from just the traditional box and give people that aha moment and maybe move more than 2 million units in a year. Well, we might be seeing all of this by next year, even, with the word that by late 2026, these things could be on store shelves. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, did the PSN outage stop you from playing games, multiplayer or single player, over the weekend? Okay, 31% say yes, 69% nice said no. I mean, I figured just the vast majority of people right now, you got a Switch, you got an Xbox, you got a PC and a PS5. 31% still, though, of everyone out there playing games. That's a fair amount who answered this poll. So I understand people looked at the compensation and said, really, Sony, that's all? But in Sony's mind, it's like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do about it? Really, it's like, hey, we're gonna give you 5 days. We're feeling generous today. So you're gonna get 5 instead of 3 or something. So people's expectations got maybe a little out of hand looking back to 2011 when that was down for, if it was down for 3 weeks, I'd say, yeah, maybe they should think about giving a game away, because then it's not necessarily the monetary side of things. Oh, I lost an entire month of PSN. It's like, oh, the confidence heavily shaken. Back in 2011, people didn't exactly look at PlayStation Network as this strong infrastructure, like, oh, what a great setup here, the network works awesome. No, it felt like it was held together with like rubber bands and popsicle sticks. It wasn't really kind of where we were with Xbox Live at that time. So they had a lot to make up for, and they gave away games, which, hey, got Infamous in the library. So that's kind of a plus. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Majin Buu, who says, with both Joy-Cons being able to be a mouse, people are forgetting one thing: left and right-handed people, which you use, whichever you are, right or right, left or left. Maybe they'll also make a keyboard, which would be better than typing on screen. Oh, they might make it so you can kind of dock the screen onto it, just plug the screen to the bottom port. You could even make a second screen that docks in the top port. Okay, well, might be dreaming a little bit there. I know people really want that second screen to attach. You know, the idea, though, of like a keyboard case isn't terrible for the Switch, too. It's kind of like what I'm picturing with that Microsoft, with the Surface tablet. You would get a case and it would close and it would cover, the screen. So it's a good way to protect it. But then when you open it up, it's a keyboard on the other side. Those accessories aren't cheap, from what I remember. That's like how much was it, $80 to $100 or something. So in that regard, it's not exactly one that's going to be great in terms of maybe mass adoption on the price side. But who knows? Maybe people look at that and say, whoa, I could have like a keyboard and a mouse. The only thing there is the Surface is set up with a Windows environment in mind, so you can do a lot with that keyboard. How much are you going to use the keyboard for with the Switch? I feel like that's kind of a Switch too. I feel like it's a convenience thing. You got to punch in a code, here you go. All right, like maybe when you got to type and talk smack in Fortnite, but really when you're actually playing games like Zelda and stuff, I assume the keyboard's not coming out unless Nintendo has some crazy plan in mind. We saw what they did with Phantom Hourglass and the stylus. Who knows? Maybe they got some WASD shenanigans in mind. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed last week's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to go over what I think is one of the biggest problems Microsoft needs to figure out going into next generation. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.